Did Mario Tennis Fever flop? And what's the prognosis for the future of Nintendo sports titles and, indeed, the developers of Mario Tennis and Mario Golf, Camelot Software Planning? Now, one thing I didn't address in my review of Nintendo's financial report a little while ago was the lack of any details for Mario Tennis Fever and how it performed. Like Metroid Prime 4, this probably indicates that it didn't cross 1 million in sales during the financial year. Unlike Metroid Prime 4, though, it just had the single Switch 2 version to shift, and it still failed, albeit with a shorter time between the February release and the end of the financial year. By comparison, we know that by March 2019, Mario Tennis Aces had cleared 2 million. I do think this comparison is a little bit unfair. Nintendo gave Tennis Aces an absolutely massive push. It was bundled with the system in a large number of places, and it was the only fully original first-party game between March and October 2018, if you discount Labo. Also, it was the first main console Mario Tennis for a lot of people for a long time, given that Ultra Smash barely made a splash with terrible reviews and reportedly only around 500,000 sales on the Wii U. Before that, the Wii Mario Tennis was a new play control version of the GameCube edition, so effectively, Mario Tennis had been the preserve of the handheld space for a very long time. Also, March 2019 gave the title 9 months to prove itself on the shelves, including a full holiday season, where the casual tennis antics usually garner more attention. On the other hand, we have Mario Tennis Fever. It released with 6 weeks before the end of the financial year, was effectively the second version of the same game on the console, since Mario Tennis Aces is still backwards compatible with the current Switch hardware, and of course, Tennis Aces is also $10 cheaper than Fever. I mentioned before my concern that Nintendo would be competing against themselves with this title, a title I will say I didn't buy myself, despite it seeming to be a step up over Aces in many respects. So, is Fever a flop? I don't necessarily think that it is. Tennis Aces on last report was just shy of shifting 5 million units, but that's an incredibly strong performance, but also a performance that shows real legs. I think there is a casual audience of Mario fans who won't queue around the block on day one for games like this, but who are more than happy to fill a Christmas stocking with a casual Mario title, and over the 8 to 10 years Nintendo will hope the Switch 2 stays on the shelves, those numbers will add up. Will it come to 5 million? Probably not, but I think there's a very strong chance that it will eventually get to 2 or 3 million. Heck, if there's a very good deal at some point, I might dive in as well. Most people seem to recognize the game being good, it's just competing in a totally different environment than its predecessor was. All that said, Nintendo will have some concerns. First of all, tennis was by far their strongest sports performer. Mario Golf and Mario Strikers performed adequately on the Switch, but were never huge hits, although it should also be said that Super Rush and Battle League were received more tepidly on the Switch in reviewing terms than either Aces or Fever. Still, if we assume that Fever maybe will end up taking about 50% of the total tally of Aces over its life, maybe 2.5 million by the mid-2030s, this means that a proportionate increase for Golf and Strikers would probably be around 1.5 million. Now, I think that could still be profitable, but it does feel like it's in the danger zone for whether Nintendo would consider the juice as being worth the squeeze. For context, the new Play Control version of Mario Power Tennis for Wii pretty much did those numbers, and that was just a GameCube game with a different control mechanism. Now, to be fair, the control mechanism was significantly different for a tennis game, and the install base of Wii as opposed to GameCube made this a different proposition from the Switch to Switch 2 situation. Back in those days as well, of course, people got very excited about these new play controls because motion controls were something quite new. Nevertheless, we have the modern equivalent to this move with the Nintendo Switch 2 edition, and Nintendo chose not to adopt this route with Mario Tennis. So instead of rolling the dice again on a brand new title potentially many years into the Switch 2's lifespan, would it make more sense to simply get a Nintendo Switch 2 edition of the current Mario Golf and Mario Strikers titles out there so that the game can continue to sell on an evergreen basis for the foreseeable future? In the case of Mario Strikers, there's a particularly strong reason to go down this route, specifically the Football World Cup, which takes place in the US, Canada, and Mexico, representing therefore a massive part of their marketing base during 2026. For the Canadian-based Next Level Games, the developers who have a strong background in sporting games and who produced Mario Strikers, it might seem like an obvious move to shadow drop a Strikers upgrade patch and follow up with a new Nintendo Switch 2 edition physical copy even a few weeks later, much as Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition also shadow dropped. There's even a perfect gap in the schedule for it, that 5-week gap between Yoshi and the Mysterious Book on the 21st of May and Star Fox on the 25th of June. The Football World Cup starts on the 11th of June, which is a Thursday right in the middle of that period. If you wanted a high-profile shadow drop with casual audience appeal, you could hardly get much better. Now it's possible that Next Level Games could do a brand new edition of Strikers, a full new game. That might be a better solution given how poorly received the first one was. It reminds me a little of how the Ultra Smash version on Wii U walked so that Tennis Aces could run. The new Strikers would need to be seriously excellent to justify a second dip, but between the more hardcore audience of Strikers and the potential of the World Cup to raise the profile of the game, it might actually be a really good shout and would set aside the bad reviews of Battle League. Next Level Games are well overdue a new title, and while I do think they are working on Luigi's Mansion 4, for many reasons I've been cool on the likelihood of this coming out too imminently. However, I do think that with their recent growth, they have been more able to sustain multiple teams, and I also sense from FIFA that there is more of an effort to bring a bit of the EPD10 flair following Super Mario Bros. Wonder into the sports titles. With 4 years to learn the grim lessons of Battle League, a brand new Mario Strikers might actually be a really decent shout. A Plus game is a harder case to make, really, especially given the way most Plus games actually stitch on a completely separate mode. My sense is that Nintendo would probably need to do what they did with Animal Crossing New Horizons and offer a massive core upgrade for the base game before adding anything in terms of a Nintendo Switch 2 upgrade, and that upgrade would probably be limited in scope since the title already retails at $60, and I don't think they want an $80 sports game on the shelves, so they really have only around $10 of value to play with in their estimation. Of course, you may say the world can't sustain 2 Mario sports titles in such quick succession, but if Nintendo is looking at these as the bedrock for evergreen sales across the generation, then it only makes sense to get these kinds of titles out the door now. Why not announce a game sooner, though? Well, they would have wanted to give Tennis Fever its due, but FIFA will have had 4 months by the time they could potentially shadow drop some kind of Strikers game if they do tie it in to the Football World Cup. Now, Nintendo doesn't always tie into major events like this. Even for the Tokyo Olympics, apart from Mario and Sonic, there really wasn't a lot on the gameplay front. Was it a coincidence that they dropped Strikers in a World Cup year last time? Probably. On the other hand, if they're looking at how to utilize Strikers, it does seem like a good opportunity to do something reasonably high profile. As a concept, it's one of those ones that feels like it would be a perfect bit of potential synergy, and I would also note that it strikes me as the perfect game for voice chat capability, allowing team communication with the 4 other members of the team. As for Mario Golf, it's a bit of a different story. Camelot is not the largest studio, but if their compensation is in any way linked to sales on the back end, then they may find it difficult to justify a large golf title in the same manner as Tennis Aces and particularly Tennis Fever, which seemed to be a pretty large game for them. We saw Alpha Dream and Bampool go to the wall despite long histories with Nintendo, and while this may be for other management reasons, Camelot is in a difficult transition phase with the Takahashi brothers already well into their 60s. The company does have provision to keep going in new directions through its smartphone app design business, but fundamentally, many of the core developers at Camelot are of a single generation that started on the Magnificent Shining games all those years ago. Going another 3 or 4 years for a potentially dicey golf title feels like something that might not appeal to them. Now, if Nintendo put their shoulder behind it and budget sufficiently that this can be a true touchstone on the golf series, things might be different. FIFA feels like it was really designed to be the ultimate Mario Tennis, and doing the same for Mario Golf might be interesting, especially as Super Rush didn't really meet the grade for a lot of people. This would also make sense if Nintendo are looking to potentially stop making new tennis and golf games at some point. Finding new developers after Camelot would not be impossible, of course, but it would require a lot of management, and with game generations becoming ever longer and with cross-platform compatibility increasingly a must, they might find it easier to iterate on one of the definitive versions of the title for a period of time. That's not to say they'd stop releasing Mario Sports titles at all. I've covered Mario Baseball in depth earlier this year, but that seems likely to me to get a return at some point. Not necessarily right away, as that development team are now, it seems, scattered to the wind, so although technically speaking the development group about Bandai Namco are still around, it would be effectively a case of starting again to recapture the magic of past Slugger's entries. But there is still more sporting potential there, and reportedly from those who played the Wii version, which I must admit I did not, it was an incredibly full-featured title, which makes me even wonder whether they might have more luck doing a remaster of that game for what by now will be a predominantly new audience, rather than go to the expense of doing a whole new game. And I've long thought that Nintendo is missing a trick with its sports games. On 3DS, they ended their extended DS 3DS shared library of sports games with Mario Sports Superstars, and so sports compilation games are very much something Nintendo has shown willingness to try in the past. But I think there's a particular strength to this strategy for Nintendo. A few decades ago, Mario Party games tended to sell in the same broad ballpark as the sports games, but now Party is an absolutely massive seller, routinely topping 10 million, with Super Mario Party well over 20 million. The potential strikes me as huge for Nintendo to do a massive, high-effort sports compilation of their Mario Sports brands as a massive party experience to complement Mario Kart and the Mario Party series. After all, we know from Switch Sports that these kinds of casual sports titles can sell really well. But if this were to be their plan, I don't know that they would want to leave Mario Golf on Super Rush, and they might prefer to have something that is a stronger and more definitive game that can be their major golf game to hold them for potentially 10 or 15 years until they decide to return to sports-specific titles. In terms of forecasting, I would make these forecasts at the current time. 70% I think there is a new Mario Golf game before the end of 2030. 30% I think there's a new Mario Strikers game before the end of 2030. 30% I think they redevelop an old sports game before 2030, whether through a Nintendo Switch 2 edition or a new version of Mario Baseball. 30% there's a Mario Strikers Push, Nintendo Switch 2 edition, free upgrade patch, new game, even a promotional campaign during the summer of 2026, linking to the World Cup. What I won't give a forecast to, because frankly it's unlikely we will ever know, is the long-term sales prognosis of Mario Tennis Fever, but I think there is a decent chance it will in fact clear 1 million this year and 2 million by the end of the decade. And if they do decide to build on it in future, and in the meantime pivot to a more party-focused Mario sports game in the late Switch 2's life and early in the life of the next machine, I could see Mario Tennis Fever ultimately surpassing all of them. That's what comes of playing the long game, I suppose. Thanks for watching. Huge thanks to the patron supporters of this channel, and I will look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.